Okay. So, like I said, we're going to get started with JavaScript today. Now, sometimes I'm using these terms, JavaScript and jQuery, interchangeably. It's important to understand that JavaScript is the core language. And just like HTML, CSS, JavaScript is one of those basic languages that every single browser understands to some extent. So you don't need anything special to just simply do regular JavaScript. jQuery, on the other hand, is built using the JavaScript language. So there's a library that you're going to have to download and put into your website files in order to actually use jQuery. But it's important to understand that jQuery is, one, it's not something that's understood by every browser, so you do have to get something extra for it. But it's built on JavaScript itself. It uses the JavaScript language in order for it to work. The best way to kind of describe it is kind of think about it as far as like English and slang. Slang still uses English in order for you to understand what someone's saying, but it's a shorter way of expressing certain things, and that's the reason why we like jQuery. jQuery tends to make a lot more sense to students than regular JavaScript. So the JavaScript language is one that is very, very different than HTML and CSS, and it's completely different thing to learn. Where jQuery kind of is a little bit easier just to start off with, and you can do more with jQuery with less code. So something that might take you 10 lines of code in regular JavaScript, you can do in one line with jQuery, for example. So let's see what this looks like. First and foremost, let's go ahead and I'm going to create an HTML page. Right now I have this HTML file inside of a folder, and right now it's just simply blank. There's nothing going on in it whatsoever. In order to start writing some JavaScript, what I need to do is I need to create a script tag. Now, the script tag can technically go in the head or the body, and there might be reasons, specific reasons why you might put it in the body, but typically the script tag goes in the head. So the script tag is just simply the word script to start off with, and inside those script tag is where we can start writing some of the JavaScript language. Now, I would like to jump really into jQuery, but just to kind of show you the way that JavaScript can work, a very easy tag in JavaScript is the alert. So what we can do is we can just simply write the word alert inside the script tag, and after alert we're going to have a set of parentheses, so left parentheses and a right parentheses. At the very end of the line we're going to have a semicolon, and you're going to notice that there's a semicolon at the end of a lot of JavaScript lines. It's essentially at the end of every single command. So whenever you're telling the JavaScript to actually do something, a lot of times you end with a semicolon. So we have the word alert, we have a set of parentheses here. Inside of the parentheses I'm going to put a set of quotations. Now you notice that very much like a lot of HTML stuff, a lot of CSS stuff as well, everything is mirrored. So we have a left and right parentheses, we have a left and right quotation. Between the quotations I can write any set of words. Like I'm going to say hello world. And once I do this, if I go ahead and refresh this HTML file, I get a little pop-up that says hello world. This little pop-up might look a little bit different depending on what browser you're on, but you're going to get a little pop-up command that's just simply going to have the words that you have in there inside the alert. So the alert is one command in JavaScript, which is very, very basic JavaScript. Every single browser understands what alert is right out of the box. However, we're going to get into some jQuery, which is going to involve first letting the browser know that we're actually using that library. So we need to tell the browser that we're using this new language, this add-on language, before we actually can write some jQuery. So if you go to the jQuery website, which is just simply jQuery.com, JQUERY. This is a very helpful website in the sense that it has like a lot of documentation. It's where you get the main jQuery library. However, there's a lot of it which is kind of written for people that already know a little bit of jQuery. There are some tutorials on the website. If you go under, I think if you start here where it says how jQuery works, it'll kind of take you through some of the basics here. But here, like I said, is where we can download the main library file that we're going to need to add into our HTML in order for the browser to understand jQuery. So, one of the things, before I get too much further, we should talk about why we're using JavaScript for jQuery. Very often when we're designing a web page, we start off with the content itself. We start off with the pictures, we start off with the text, we start off with the containers. Like if we're setting this container here up in a div, we have like 3 different columns here. We have like text, we have a set of images, we have basically the content itself. We do all of that with HTML as far as like dividing up this content with images and text how we need to. We use CSS to stylize things. Like so CSS determines the fact that this is blue. It determines the font style of this. It determines the font weight of some of the text. Very often HTML in grammar terms is kind of referred to as the nouns. Like HTML is the nouns, the subject matter of the sentence. The CSS is like the adjective. It's describing what those nouns are. So instead of just simply saying like car or house, like we're saying red car, we're saying a blue house, tall house, or something like that. JavaScript and jQuery is how we add actions and interactivity to our website. So we've already discussed with CSS how we can do a basic hover command, so that as we hover the mouse over a certain part of our HTML, that it can change in some way. So we can do a little bit of interactivity with CSS, but when it comes to much more major things with interactivity, when it comes to animations, when it comes to motion, this is when we decide to start adding in the JavaScript. Now, it's very important to understand that we very often start with the content itself. We start with the content and we describe that content and we stylize that content before we get into the jQuery. Because the jQuery, for the most part, is reactive to what's going on. So the JavaScript is just kind of waiting around for the user of your website to actually do something. So it's waiting for the user to click on something, and then it does a whole bunch of other commands. Or it waits for the user to hover over something, and then it does a whole bunch of commands. So it's called what is event-driven. It's an event-driven language because it's waiting for an event to happen. So what we're going to do today is we're going to create a photo gallery, a really, really basic photo gallery, so that instead of what we were doing last week, where as you click on the different thumbnails, it's just going to a JPEG. What we're going to do is we're going to quickly set up a really basic photo gallery where you have the thumbnails in one location and you're going to have a large image in another location. So as you click on the thumbnails, it's going to change what that large image actually is. So we're going to do this with JavaScript and jQuery because it involves a bit more interactivity than we can do with CSS and HTML. We're going to have a click function. So once you actually click on something in our one part of our page, it's going to create a reaction on another part of that page. So right now we click and it's actually just opening up a file, or it's opening up an HTML or a JPEG. In this case, when we click, it's going to change something else on the page. So like I said, we need to go to the jQuery website in order to download the main library. The main library is going to be right here, this big orange button here. And if we scroll down, again, I apologize because a lot of this is written for coders, but the file that you want to download is the one that is right here. It's going to be the compressed production version of jQuery. Now these numbers might be different because it's different version numbers. As the people that create jQuery, like, find new features and, clear up like security issues, you're going to find that this number, as far as the version itself, is actually changing. But for the most part, what you can focus on is where it says compressed production, and it's going to be one of the first links that's on this page in this list here. Now, depending on what browser you're in, when you click on it, it might immediately download a file. It might also open this that you see here. This is the jQuery library, and there's no reason to ever really open this up or need to read it. Basically, we just need to save this document. So I'm just going to, if you do Command S, you'll be able to save this file, this .js file, on your computer. Now, one other thing, I believe it is Safari, that when you download this, it might not immediately come up as a .js. So make sure that when you're selecting as far as the file type, there's one that says JavaScript, because I think the default might be something like Web Archive. If you're doing it in Firefox or Chrome, you should be fine. But Safari sometimes downloads this file a little strangely. But we're going to go ahead and download this file. I'm going to put it with the HTML that we have here. So just like we would have our list of HTML files and a list of CSS files, list of image files, we're going to have a .js file or JavaScript file, and this is the main jQuery library. So, in our HTML, we need to tell the browser that we are going to be using this file. Now, feel free if you would like to rename this file. It's kind of a strange file name, and if you don't get it exactly right, it could mess up. It might not read your jQuery correctly. So feel free to rename this file if you want, as long as it ends with a .js. I'm going to keep it the same, but yeah. Yes. So I didn't want to kind of introduce like the JavaScript stuff. Hopefully, if I can get through that, we'll have some more time there. I can also stay after if you have some time to stay. So, So yeah, we need to tell the browser that in our HTML that we're going to be using this file. In the same way that if we have an external CSS file, we need to link to that external CSS file. So when it comes to JavaScript, the way that we do this, if we're doing it in CSS, we use the link tag, and we have rel equals style sheet. We usually put in this type text/CSS, and then we have the href, which is going to that style sheet file. When we're doing JavaScript, then first we're going to start off with a script tag, similar to what we have here with the script tag here. But before we actually close the beginning script tag, we're going to add in a few things. So here we also have a type, and here we're going to put in text/JavaScript. We don't need to do a rel, but we do need to tell the HTML where this file actually exists. So with the script tag, instead of doing an href, we're actually going to use the src attribute. So use src, and then that's going to go to the JavaScript file. So then we can close off the beginning script tag, and we can create an ending script tag. So these are kind of similar in the sense that like we have to put in this type, and we have to specify where the external file actually is. But with the script tag, we use the src instead of the href, similar to the fact that like we use the href with the anchor tag, we use the src with the image tag. And with the link tag, it's one of those rare tags that does not have an ending tag, and with these JavaScript one, we do have an ending tag. So, with this script tag here, we are able to tell the browser that we are indeed using JavaScript, or I'm sorry, jQuery, in our page today. So, okay. So, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this alert, because otherwise it's going to be really annoying every single time I refresh the page for that pop-up to come up. Now, before we get too much further with the actual jQuery code, let's go ahead and set up our HTML and CSS. So, like I said, what I want to do is I want to set it up so that we have some thumbnails. As we click on those thumbnails, it's going to change with large images in another part of the screen. So first, let's go ahead and set up the thumbnails themselves. Like, so we have inside of this images folder, we have a gallery folder, and we have a thumb folder. This is the same that I had last week. So it's the save and zip if you want to use the one from last week. Or again, you can use your own images as well. But we have some thumbnails, which are sized and cropped the way that we want them. So first, let's go ahead in our body. I'm going to create a div to contain those thumbnails. I'm going to create a div with the ID thumbs. And inside of the div with the ID thumbs, I'm going to go ahead and create an image tag. I'm going to set the src to look inside the images folder, inside the gallery folder, inside the thumb folder, and look for photo1.jpg. And let's go ahead and create 4 of those. So I'm going to copy this whole line with the image tag. And I'm just going to make sure the src is changed. So we have all 4 of our images here. So if I go ahead and run that, or refresh this page, we just see the 4 thumbnails here. Next, we want to set it up so that when we click on each one of these thumbnails, it's going to show one of these large images. Now there's a few different ways that we can do this, but one of the most straightforward, easy ways of doing this is we're going to have the large images already on the page, and we're just simply going to hide the large images that we don't want to see and only show the large image that we do want to see when we click the correct thumbnail. So we're going to start off by actually having all those large images there already, and then we're going to hide the ones we don't want, and then use the JavaScript to show the one, specifically the one that we do want. So first, let's create a section for those large images. So I'm going to say div ID large. And inside of this div, let's go ahead and create those image tags. And these are going to go to the large images. So inside of the folder images, inside the folder gallery, and I'm just going to look for photo 1. So the way that I organize this, we have all of the thumbnails inside the thumb folder, and all of the large images are just outside of that thumb folder. So I'm going to copy that 4 times for the 4 large images, and I'm going to have 2, 3, and 4. So we just have 2 divs, and each div has 4 images in it. The first one has the 4 thumbnails, and the second one has the 4 large images. So right now, if I refresh this, we have the thumbnails and we have these large images, which are just kind of wrapping themselves down below. Okay. So let's add a little bit of CSS to this. For now, I'm going to use the style tag to put this inside the same HTML file that we have everything else. Of course, this would all still work if we had an external style sheet. I'm just doing this for the sake of time and to kind of keep all of this on the same page for now. Let's go ahead and just put in a little bit of style here. I'm going to say div #thumbs. Let's go ahead and I'm going to add a width. Let's say 85% and margin. Let's do 20 pixels auto. And let's go ahead and add in a border. So we have a width and a margin, which allows us to center it, and a border that just allows us to see like that section. Let's also just use text align center to center the thumbnails in that space. So for the thumbnails, we have the thumbnails here with just kind of centered in that area. Let's add in just a little bit of padding. Cool. Let's also create a container for the large image. This will help us to kind of see what this area actually is. Let's go ahead and do div #large. And let's do very similar to this, what we're doing for the thumbnails. But let's go to make the border blue instead of red. Yes.
And then,
I was trying to keep up with it, like I'll forget it.
is it mandatory to have this for the final project?
No. So that was one thing I was saying before, that this is just an introduction to what we're going to be talking about next semester. They wanted to just kind of touch on it this semester, just so that you're not going in just completely wrong. But this will, be gone over a lot slower and things like that. Where for the most part, we're just kind of showing you what JavaScript can really do.
And then, could you scroll up to the top?
Sure. This is where we have the JavaScript file. I actually don't have a CSS file in here, so I can go ahead and take that out.
Like the very top, doesn't it matter, like in doc type, should you put JavaScript? Like, if you're telling the browser this is HTML, do you also tell them it's JavaScript?
No. With the doc type mostly, we use this exact same doc type. There were other doc types that were very common, but this is the modern one to use no matter what. JavaScript, just like CSS, JavaScript is incorporated into the rest of the page. So the main core thing that you're actually, the container for everything you're still doing, is still an HTML file. We're just adding some JavaScript to it. And like I said, there is some JavaScript that can be done without jQuery. But if we're going to be using jQuery, then we need to add in the file in this way for the main jQuery library.
And then, you know how when you write this, like you can name it other things? Can you do that with scripts also? Like, are there going to be a lot of script tags?
Not a lot, no. We're going to have one script tag, which is going to be linking to that file, and we're going to have one script tag, which is where we're going to actually write our JavaScript. When we do CSS, like we use the link tag to link to an external style sheet, and then we use, if we want to have internal style, which typically we don't have an external style and internal style, but the internal style we use as far as the style tag, and this is where we can write our CSS. With JavaScript, we use the script tag in two different ways. Like we use the script tag to link to that external file, but we also use the same script tag when we're going to write our own custom JavaScript for jQuery. Does that answer your question? Cool. So I'm adding just a little bit of CSS just to kind of make sure that we can see what's going on. It's basically just centering this content and adding a border around it with a little bit of padding. And let's take a look at that. Cool. Now, the more important thing that we want to do in the CSS that's actually going to accomplish what it is, there's a lot more that we can add to the CSS just to kind of dress this up. But the more important thing that we want to do with the CSS is set up what we want the page to look like when we first load. So before we interact with the page at all, before we click on anything, before we hover on anything, we need to add some CSS here so that it sets it up for the JavaScript that we actually want. So what we want to do is we want to set it up so that all of these images, we don't see these images unless we actually click on one of these thumbnails. Now, this is one of those points that's a little bit debatable as far as from a user interface standpoint. Do we start off by having at least one image in here, like the first one here, the first one we have a Star Trek, or do we start off completely blank so that nothing is there until we actually click on it? It's one of those things that's a little bit debatable, but for now, what I'm going to do is I do want to start off with at least one of them so that there's something in that space, but we're going to hide all of these other ones. So, the way that I'm going to do that is, first in the HTML, I'm going to add in IDs to all of these images here. The IDs are also going to help us to link one image tag to the other. So when we click on this thumbnail, we know that this is going to be the one that we're actually going to show up. So first, let's go ahead and add an ID to this first image tag in the thumbs. I'm going to say ID, and we're just going to call this thumb1. And we're going to do the same thing for these other thumbnails here. So we have thumb1, thumb2, thumb3, and thumb4. Next, for the large images, let's go ahead and add in an ID for each one. So we're going to say ID large1. And I'm going to do a similar thing for all these large images. Large 2, large 3, and large 4. So the IDs are going to help us in both CSS as well as JavaScript. Now, just adding the IDs hasn't actually done anything to hide these images yet, but what I'm going to do is inside our CSS here, inside of our style tag, I'm going to add in a rule for div hash large, and I'm going to say space img. So by putting in the space img, now I'm talking about all of the image tags that are inside of the div with the ID large. Now, another way I could do this is I could add a class to all of those image tags. So if I added a class that was like maybe large images to all these image tags, I could also do that same thing to reference all of those image tags at once. But what I want to do is I want to reference all those image tags so I can make all of them disappear. So I'm going to say, since I don't have the class in here, I can still reference it this way. I can reference the container, space, the HTML tag itself. So div hash large, space img, and the property we're going to use is display, and we're going to use the value none. So by doing display none, I'm hiding all the image tags that are inside of large. So if I refresh that, all those images are now gone. Now again, like I said, it's kind of a user interface, a little bit of a debate. You know, maybe you want to have something in there to start with, just so that it's filling that space. But maybe you instead want it to be blank so that it only shows up the large images when you actually click on it. Let's do the second one, where we start off with at least one of the images. So what I'm going to do is the very first one, which is large 1, in our CSS, I'm going to say img hash large 1. And for that one, I'm going to say display inline. So very often, if we want something to show up, we use either display inline or display block. Display none will hide it no matter what, but one of these will usually show that particular object. And we use display inline if it's an inline element, like image tag, bold, italics, anchor tag, things like that. And we use a display block to show it up if it's a block level element, such as like the div or the paragraph tag or something like that. So because it's an image, we're going to use display inline. So what our CSS is doing right now is it's hiding all the large images and it's showing one very specific one. So this is talking about a large group. It's talking about any image tag that's inside of large. And this one is talking about one very specific image that has that ID large 1. So now when we go to save that and we go to refresh, oops, let's say image large 1. Oh, you know what? I think we have to get more specific with this. So if we do div hash large. Okay, yeah. So we have to get a little bit more specific with this. We are going to put in div hash large at the very beginning of this so that it knows not only are we hiding all the images that are inside of large, but specifically the one that's inside of the large div. That's the one that we're doing display inline for. So we've used HTML to just set up our content. And we're using HTML in order to create all of the IDs that we're going to need to reference later on. We're using CSS not only to stylize things a little bit, just to kind of create containers and borders for things, but we're also using CSS to set up the start state of things. So what is the state of things and how is it starting before we get into any interactivity when someone actually clicks on something. So the start state of things is that we have all those large images there, but they're hidden until we create this click functionality. And yeah. So let's go into our jQuery. Now, much like the HTML, it doesn't really matter as far as like the line breaks, so feel free to put some extras in order to space things out, in order to make it more readable. In order to begin any jQuery, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to add in, and I have this on the class website because it can be difficult to remember, but any sort of major jQuery tutorial or jQuery book will kind of tell you what this command is to start the jQuery. So we have to start off with this command here where we have $sign and parentheses document.ready, the function, and then it's like a set of parentheses, a set of curly braces here. And then we end with this line here. This is just basically telling the browser that we're getting ready to do some jQuery. It's one of those things that's not really customizable or that really kind of makes a lot of sense to change. It's just one of those things you kind of set it and forget it. to start our jQuery itself. We're going to be using this $sign a lot. The $sign is the jQuery's main character that it uses to start off describing anything that's going on in our HTML. But let's go ahead and add this in for right now. If I had more time, I'd love to explain a little bit more about how this works, but like I said, it's pretty much you just copy it kind of as is to begin our jQuery, and then we have this part here right before the ending script tag as a way to end our jQuery. So kind of think of this as the beginning tag and the ending tag. Everything that's going to be involved in our jQuery is going to go in between. So, one of the things that we're going to do is if we want to show, say that we want to show a large 2. When we click on the second thumbnail, we're going to want to show the large 2 image. In order to do that in our jQuery, first we have to reference that specific image tag. Now in CSS, if we want to reference a very specific image, we use this img hash and then the ID itself. Or we use whatever the tag name is, hash, for the ID, that tag. Or if we're talking about a class, we would say img dot maybe large images if we had that class set up. And of course this will work without the tag name, if you just simply do hash or you just simply do dot. But again, I like to have the tag name in there to be more clear. In jQuery, we use very similar syntax, but we first start off with the $sign. And then we have a set of parentheses, a left and right parentheses. I'm going to zoom in on this just because it can sometimes get confusing between these parentheses and these curly braces. But we have a $sign, we have a set of parentheses, and then between those parentheses we have a set of quotations. Once we have this set of quotations, we can use the exact same syntax that we typically use inside of our CSS. So in this case, if I want to reference this particular tag, I'm going to say the tag name itself, img, and then I'm going to say hash the ID name itself. So we have $sign, parentheses, and quote, and then we're going to say img hash large tag. So in CSS, to reference this, I would say img hash large 2. And this is how we start writing the CSS for this particular tag. In jQuery, we started off with saying $sign parentheses quote, and then we have the same syntax, the same way that we reference in our CSS. We have that inside of quotations.
Just the curly bracket and then parentheses.
So we have this up here, the document ready function, and then that whole thing ends right here.
Okay.
If you see it, it does actually mirror. The semicolon we very often have at the very end of jQuery lines, but everything else does kind of mirror. So we have the beginning parentheses, we have this ending parentheses here, we have a beginning parentheses here, we have a start and end right here, but this one, and brackets is kind of helping you out here a little bit. As we highlight one, it's highlighting the other. This parentheses is ending this one here. This right curly brace is ending this one up here. So this is just the end of this document ready function line. And again, this is one of those things that it's copied exactly as it is. You don't really need to customize it. Like I said, if we had a little more time, I'd kind of go into how this is really set up, but this is just And we're actually going to be talking maybe a little bit about this today, but in a minute. But the customization is everything that's kind of going in between these two. So we have, if we're trying to reference large 2, we have $, parentheses, and quote. And inside this quotations is the same way that we would reference it in our CSS before we get into the curly braces. Now, after the parentheses, if we want to make this second image show up, what we're going to do is after these parentheses, we're going to say dot show, and then a left and right parentheses, and then a semicolon. So the beginning of this is just referencing what tag we're actually talking about. The end of this is the action that we actually want to do on that tag. So the beginning of this is just referencing the image with the ID large 2, and the end of this is what it is that we're actually doing to it, which is, in this case, we're showing it. So right now, if I go ahead and refresh this HTML, in addition to what we were setting up before with the CSS, where we have these thumbnails, we have this first large image, we're doing jQuery to make this just immediately show up. So this is the large 2, it's just immediately showing that image. Now, ideally we want this to happen only when we click on the second thumbnail. And we're going to be getting to that in a minute, how to set up that event. Right now we set up an effect, but we need to set up the event. But before we get into that effect, we also want to talk about what else we want to happen when we click on the second thumbnail. So when we click on the second thumbnail, not only do we want to show this large image, large 2, when we click on thumb 2, we also want to hide whatever image was there before. So, just like we use this to reference that large 2, what we can do is we can reference large 1, this first image tag, by saying $, parentheses, quote, img, hash, large 1. So this is how we reference large 2, and now this is how we reference large 1, that image with the ID large 1. Now the effect that we're going to do off of that is we're going to say hide. And we're going to have a set of parentheses and a semicolon. So this one is hiding large 1, and this one is now showing large 2. So now when I refresh the browser, we're only seeing the second image. So right now our jQuery is doing the action that we're going to eventually want when we click on the second thumbnail. Our CSS is saying that we are hiding all of the large images, and then we're showing specifically the one that we want. So our CSS is hiding all those images and showing large 1 to begin with. And right now our jQuery, before we set up the actual event, our jQuery is just immediately hiding the large 1, and then it's showing large 2. So we still need to set up the event itself. The event is going to be when we actually click on thumb 2, then we want this to actually happen, not before. So, we need to set up this event for, we're going to set the first one up for thumb 2. So in the same way that we referenced large 1 here, and we're referencing large 2 here, we're going to do $, parentheses, and quotes. We're going to say img, hash, thumb 2. And jQuery knows that, again, this is the tag that we're actually talking about. This is the HTML element. Now, the hide and the show are events, but in this case we're going to be setting up, the hide and show are effects. The things that are actually happening, but this one we're setting for an event. It's waiting for something to happen. So here we're going to say dot click, and similar to what we have below, we are going to have a set of parentheses and a semicolon. But in between those parentheses, we're going to add in some other things. So kind of similar to what we have here for this document ready. Inside of those parentheses, we're going to have the word function. After the word function, we're going to have a left and right parentheses. And after those parentheses, we're going to have a left and right curly brace. So you can see that brackets is trying to help me out here by completing that. But it's important to understand that we have inside of the parentheses for click, we have the word function. Immediately following function, we have just a left and right parentheses, just like we have up here. And immediately after those parentheses, we have a left and right curly brace. Now, between those curly braces, we can add in a couple of line breaks. Now, we have set up a click event function so that when we specifically click on this image with the ID thumb2, it's going to do everything that's in between these two curly braces. So right now what I have highlighted here, these are the boundaries of what's going to happen when we click on thumb2. Somewhere in our CSS, we have the curly braces set up as all of these properties are set up for div thumbs, and we can have as many properties as we want. In jQuery, we have the set of curly braces here for our click event function. And we can do a bunch of different things in here, as many things as we really need to do. But it's only going to do that when we actually click on thumb2. Right now, I have this hide and show outside of this click function, which means that it is immediately happening. When I refresh this, we're not seeing we're not seeing large 1, and it's not hiding large 2. When I refresh this, it's immediately doing these two things, which is hiding large 1 and showing large 2. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move these two commands inside the click function. So I'm going to cut and paste them. And let's make sure it's tabbed over. The tabs don't actually matter other than readability, which means they do matter. So we have that same large 1 hide and the same large 2 show inside of this click function. So now, if I go ahead and save this, now when I refresh this, now we're back to normal. It's showing the large 1, which is what I have set up in our CSS. It's hiding all the other images and showing just large 1. We're back to normal because this hide and show commands are now inside of the click function. The browser is waiting for us to actually do something before it actually does these two commands. So whenever the browser is waiting for us to do something, that is what's called an event function. So other examples of event functions other than click would be things like we're mousing over something, maybe we're typing something, that's also another type of event. But essentially the browser is waiting for some sort of user input before it actually does something. So the thing that's actually going to do is it's going to do this hide and show, but it's only going to do it when we actually click on this specific element. So the image that has the ID thumb2. So I click on the image that has the ID thumb2, and it hides that first image and shows the one that we actually want. If I go ahead and refresh, right now we only have a click function on the first thumbnail, but as I click on it, it's doing pretty much exactly what we want. It knows that thumb2 is connected to large 2 just because we're specifically specifying it in our jQuery code. That we're clicking on thumb2, it's showing large 2. Any questions on this so far? Again, I know I'm throwing a lot of new code here at you all at once, but... Okay. So, right now we've only set up the click function for thumb 2. In theory, if I go ahead and copy all of this that I have selected right now, I don't need to copy the document ready function. I don't need to copy this part down here. This document ready function is going to hold all of our jQuery code. Similar to the fact that we have a body tag that holds all of our major HTML code. We don't need to have multiple body tags within the same HTML. In the same way, we don't need to have multiple document ready function things inside of our jQuery code. We only need one of them. So, in order to do this for another thumb, I would just need to copy, starting with this code here where we have a click function, ending where we have this tag here, which is closing off that click function. I would just need to copy these 4 lines here. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste it underneath. And let's set this up for thumb 3. So the thing I'm actually going to be clicking on is thumb 3. The thing I'm actually going to be showing instead of large 2 is going to be large 3. Now the thing I'm going to be hiding, that's an interesting question. So if we start this off and the first thing we actually click is thumb 3, then yes, we do want to hide large 1. But if I show large 2 first and then I click on large 3, then the next thing I want to hide is large 2. So there's a few different ways that we can handle this. One is that whenever we have a click function, we can say we want to hide all of the other ones by copying this line and saying, okay, if I click on thumb 3, I'm going to hide large 1, I'm going to hide large 2, I'm going to hide large 4, and I'm going to show, we only need it 3 times, and then we're going to show large 3. And if I click on thumb 2, then let me copy this line. So I'm going to hide large 1, I'm going to hide large 3, and I'm going to hide large 4. So for each click function, I could say, yeah, I want to hide all of these, and I want to hide all of these before I show the one I want. But there's a shorter way that we can do this. We want a way of showing specifically the one we want, so we're going to use the ID of that image tag. But in order to hide any image tag which is already there, no matter which one it is, let's reference it the same way that we do it in our CSS. So in our CSS, when we do the display none, we're doing it for div #large space img. I'm going to copy this exact rule that we have here. And where we have inside of quotations, we're specifically trying to hide large 1. I'm going to replace that with what I copied from the CSS, which is div #large space img. Same thing for the thumb 3. Instead of hiding specifically large 1, I'm going to paste what we have below, which is div #large space img. So now what this is saying is I don't care what's currently there. It doesn't really matter which large image is there. I'm going to hide all of the large images. And then I'm going to show specifically the one that we want. Now you might say, Jonathan, doesn't it get confused because if large 4, for example, is not already there, and we're trying to hide large 4, is the rest going to be confused? No, we're not going to get any errors or anything like that. Because basically we're just telling the browser what we're trying to do. We're trying to hide all of those other ones, whether they're already hidden or not. So this is hiding all image tags that are inside of the div with the ID large, and it works the same exact way that we have it in our CSS. So the important thing to remember is that when we have this $, parentheses, and quote, what goes inside of those quotations is the same exact syntax that you would use for your CSS. So however you're trying to define a specific container or a class or an ID, the same way that you would specify that before the curly braces is what you have inside of those quotations there. It's one of the reasons why we like jQuery is because if you already know some CSS, then it's a little bit of a shortcut. Whereas if we weren't using jQuery, we'd have to say documents.get element by ID space and then this large 2. It's kind of a much more confusing so this is kind of this is kind of the normal, what's often called vanilla JavaScript way of doing it, and this is the, or rather inline in this case. So this is the normal JavaScript way of doing it, and this is the jQuery way of doing it. And this is just an example of how the jQuery way is just a little bit more clear than the normal JavaScript way of doing it. So we don't need to do it this way if we have jQuery installed. We just need to do it this way. And this is just an example of how it's shorter. There's lots of other things which are, trust me, a lot shorter in jQuery than it would be with regular JavaScript. The main thing with jQuery that's tough is just that, one, we have to make sure that we include the actual jQuery library file, not just in our HTML, but actually with our other files. We make sure that we include that file itself. And also we start off with this document ready function thing, which is, like I said, it's a little bit confusing, but once we have that, then we're off to the races. We can start our jQuery code, which is a lot simpler.
But in the document, you have to have the jQuery, but you also still have to have that CSS.
Sorry, you're talking
Well,
about...
you must have to have it because you need to give hashtag large in there, so you have to have that style.
Yeah, the style helps us to, well, one, it's helping us to stylize this a little bit. It's just giving us like these containers and these borders, which doesn't, it's just for our own visual benefit. But for the most part, we have to have a little bit of CSS in here just to kind of establish the fact that we're hiding all the other images and showing the specific one that we want. The jQuery is not dependent upon the CSS for the most part, but it is dependent on you setting up the HTML. So we do need to set up HTML as far as like the containers that we want and the IDs. Like jQuery is really big on the IDs and the classes that you set up. So you have to make sure that whatever you're going to be referencing as a button, whatever you're going to be referencing as something that's going to be affected, like you're hiding or showing something, those things should have either IDs or classes as necessary so that you can reference that in the JavaScript. The same way that we need to create IDs or classes if we need to stylize it. If I want to stylize this large container, I need to give it an ID. Same thing in same thing in jQuery. I need to give it an ID or class in order to reference what I'm clicking on, or I need to reference what I'm actually showing in the ID. So those IDs and classes are very, very important when it comes to both CSS and jQuery. Does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. So now we have a click function for thumb2. It is hiding, no matter what the image is, it's hiding that, and it's showing the large 2. And then we have a click function for the thumbnail 3. It's going to be hiding all those large images and showing specifically the ones we want. So now we're starting off with large 2. If I click on the thumbnail 2, it's hiding that previous one and showing that one. And if I click on this one, it's again hiding whatever image was there before and just showing a large 3. And right now I can go back and forth between 2 and 3. and it will hide and show them in that way. So, in order to set this up for thumbnail 1 and thumbnail 4, I would just simply, again, copy and paste this. So we have an additional one for thumb 4, and most of the rest of this is going to remain the same. I'm changing the thing that I'm actually clicking on, and I'm going to change the thing that we're actually showing up, but most of the rest is going to stay the same. And we're going to do the same thing for thumb 1. Let's go ahead and copy this. Tap it over. And instead of thumb 2, we're going to change the thing that we're actually clicking on to thumb 1. And the image itself, the thing that we're actually showing up, is large 1. So now, this same thing works for all 4 of our thumbnails. As I click on any one of these thumbnails in any order, it's going to hide whatever is there and show specifically the one we want. So this is an example of a photo gallery where, again, we're staying on the same page. We're not going to the image, we're not going to a separate HTML page. We're staying on this page, and we are changing the large image that we're actually looking at based on the thumbnail that we're actually clicking in this case. Cool. So, one of the reasons why we use jQuery, first of all, we use JavaScript jQuery just to do some extra interactivity, or like I said, some animations. But another thing that we really like out of jQuery is that once we start with this foundation of the main jQuery library, then in addition to that, we can add on what are called jQuery plugins. The plugins will add on to the functionality that we're currently doing and add even more things to what we have. The same way that we have extensions, like for different programs. Like, we start off with the Chrome or the Firefox browser, but we can add on extensions, for the browser itself in order to add on extra functionality. We can do the same thing with plugins for JavaScript and jQuery. Now, like I said, I'm going to be going through this a little bit quickly, but it's just to kind of show you just what the JavaScript and jQuery can do. So first of all, there is which one should I do? There's a JavaScript plugin which is called Cycle2. Cycle2 is a slideshow plugin where if we go into some of these demos, you see that it takes an already large photo and it just simply transitions between them, where we can have a simple fade effect. We have this effect which is scrolling horizontally, and this one is more manual, it's not automatic, so we have previous and next controls. And it also has other effects. Where are those other effects? Or here, better yet. Show this off the cycle line. There's also other effects that we could add to this, like the shuffle effect, the zoom effect, in addition to like the fade effect. Same thing as far as like this turn down, this curtain scrolling right. All of these things would be a lot more complicated if we were trying to program it from scratch with regular JavaScript. They would actually even be complicated if we were trying to do it from scratch with regular jQuery. However, once you kind of set up a few things, then all you need to do to make this happen, assuming that you have the HTML set up correctly, is just this little bit of code that you see below each of these examples. So once you have just a little bit of setup, the plugin allows you to do this kind of effect with just a little bit of JavaScript or jQuery code. So this is an example of a slideshow. So if we had rather than like doing this thumbnail thing, or even doing this kind of thumbnail thing where we have a preview of what the image looks like in thumbnail form, and we click on that to get the large image, the large uncropped image. Slideshow is another very effective way of doing a photo gallery where we start off with a large photo, and then we have some sort of commands that allow us to kind of go next, like that. And a very common way of doing a photo gallery is what's called a lightbox. Now, there's a lot of different kinds of lightbox plugins out there, just like there's actually a lot of slideshow plugins out there. jQuery is a very popular language, so if you're looking to do something with jQuery, chances are, as long as it's relatively common, you're going to find a bunch of different options out there. So, a lightbox, I'm sure you've seen before, is where you start off with thumbnails, just like we have for the examples that we did today. But you start off with thumbnails, and when you click on any one of those thumbnails, it opens up on that same page. It has a centered, much larger version of that photo, and then it has like kind of a overlay over the rest of the page. And then we'll click on the X to get out of that. Very often, lightboxes will also have the option to have like some captions along with it. This one tells you which image you're currently on, so it's saying it's image 1 of 3. And we have these arrows here that as we click on any one of them, it's going through this gallery. It's just kind of fading between each one. So the lightbox is where you start off with thumbnails, you click on something to get this larger image. And again, we're not leaving the page itself, it's just putting it on top of everything, and we're allowed to kind of click through that. Now, you might say to yourself, that's great, but I don't really like the look of these arrows. I wish the arrows looked different, or I wish the arrows were on the side, or maybe I wish they were kind of on the bottom. One thing is, again, we have a lot of different options when it comes to lightboxes, so you might just want to Google around jQuery lightbox. And if you Google jQuery lightbox, again, you'll find, I want to spell it correctly, but yes, if you Google jQuery lightbox, you'll find a bunch of different options out there, and you would typically like click on a lot of these and see like, does this look a little bit more like what I'm trying to go for? Does this one look a little more what I'm trying to go for? Once you generally know how to use jQuery plugins in general, you're going to have a lot of different options at your disposal, so that you can kind of see like, I do kind of like the look of this one a little bit better, like this kind of portrait. I like the look of like these like close buttons a little bit better, or maybe I like the look of the arrows here on the side, and where it's having the number 1 of 7 on this side over here. So you can kind of have your pick of the litter once you kind of know generally how to use jQuery plugins to begin with. But yeah, let's. I'm just gonna really quick power through just adding one of these plugins in here. So let's do this one here. This is a cycle plugin. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have a set of photos, and we're just going to cycle between them. Now, with any jQuery plugin that's out there, you want to look on the website to see like what the documentation is out there. Usually they'll have like a getting started guide, or like basics, or how it works. You want to try to find something that kind of tells you just very basically like how to kind of get started with this particular plugin. Very often it will involve first maybe setting something up in your HTML, maybe something in your CSS, but one of the universal things is that if you are adding in a jQuery plugin, you're going to have to add in extra files to your website. So in this case, like where it says download cycle plugin, I'm going to click on that, And I have a few different options here. I would actually read through this, but I'm telling you because I already know this one. I'm just going to click one where we have cycle plugin here, and it's giving me a JavaScript file. I'm going to go ahead and save this with the other files. So now not only do we have the main jQuery library, we also have the cycle plugin file. Let's go ahead and duplicate that HTML file that I set up before. I'm going to call this one plugin.html. In plugin HTML, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of pretty much everything except for, let's keep that large in our HTML. I'm just going to get rid of all this style for right now. And I'm going to get rid of almost all of our jQuery except for the document ready function part and the end of that document ready function part. So we have some really basic HTML here. We don't have any style. We emptied out all of our custom jQuery. We still have the link to the main jQuery library, and in addition to that, I'm going to copy this entire line so that in addition to adding the main jQuery library, I'm also going to add in that brand new file that I just copied here. So it's jQuery.cycle all.js. So now we have both. In our custom jQuery here, right now if I go ahead and run this plugin.html file, I'm just seeing all these large images just automatically there. In order to make this work in our jQuery, what I'm going to do is I'm going to first reference the container for these large images, which is just a div with the ID large. And off of that, I believe I can just simply do .cycle. Yeah, let's take a look. So now you see that we first only see one image, and it's automatically doing a slideshow of those large images. So, this, and I only know because I've used this plugin many times, but if you went on the website, you actually kind of read through some of the documentation, you would kind of know what's involved with this particular one. But you can see that from just this HTML here, having some sort of container for the large images, by making sure that we're adding the correct files in our head, then we can go ahead and set up this slideshow with very minimal effort when it comes to the jQuery. Now, we could, from here, we could add in a lot of different customizations. The cycle plugin allows you to control, where's that page? The cycle plugin will allow you to control the speed of that slideshow, as well as like I said, these different effects, like, you know, like in addition to fading, like you can do zoom with this weird shuffle one. You can determine whether or not you want it to be automatic or a manual slideshow. But right out of the box, we can just simply do .cycle off of that container, and we automatically get that slideshow. With a lot of jQuery plugins out there, there's like a way you can kind of do very minimal effort, you know, with a lot of those automatic controls. But most jQuery plugins out there will have some customizations to them, so you can kind of tweak things here and there based off of some basic parameters. this is, again, just going to give you a taste of what JavaScript and jQuery can do. We didn't even really get into let me see. Yeah. So there's other different effects that you can do in addition to what we're doing with the hide and show. There's other different kind of animations that we can do in addition to those things. But yeah, JavaScript and jQuery really opens the door when it comes to things that we can do with our website. So that with the HTML and CSS is just how we can kind of stylize very static thing, and then we're just simply linking to a different file. With the JavaScript and jQuery, we kind of stay in the same file, and adding in a lot of different interactivity and animation and things like that. But yeah, there's obviously a lot more to discuss, and kind of getting a little bit more to the nitty-gritty of how some of the stuff works. But we're going to be saving that again for mostly for next semester. The one other thing that I wanted to show you, we have just enough time to do this. I realized that I haven't really talked too much about the inspect element. So the inspect element is a tool which you see in different browsers. Pretty much every a modern browser has some sort of version of this. Firefox and Chrome have it right out of the box. Even Internet Explorer does as well. Safari, if you're a big Safari fan, with Safari, if you want to see the inspect element, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to go into the settings for it, which will look a little bit different than this, but you'll need to go into the settings. There's a place for advanced as far as these different tabs, and there's a checkbox that says show development menu and menu bar. By default, I believe that is not checked. So in Safari, if you want to use the inspect element, you want to go into settings, you want to go into advanced, and you want to make sure that is checked where it says show development menu and menu bar. Once you have that checked, you'll have the same inspect things that I'm about to show you. So in order to get into the inspect element tool, you can right click pretty much anywhere on the page, and it'll either say the word inspect or inspect element. When you click on that, you're going to get a window. It might be a separate window. It might be docked to the main browser window. But you're going to get a window which is going to be split into two different parts. On the left side, you're going to get HTML. And on the right side, you may get some CSS. So the way this works is it will allow you to highlight a very specific part of your page, a specific element or specific section. And once we actually click on that, so right now I'm seeing the HTML here on the left-hand side, but it's collapsed inside of these containers. So we have the HTML, we have the head, we have the body. I can see thumbs and I can see large, but it's all collapsed inside these triangles. So I click on the triangle for thumbs, and I see those thumbnails here, the same way that I would see it just fully here in our HTML. You see the thumbnails here. So I can go ahead and collapse on that or expand on that for the large and for the thumbnails. Now you'll see that as I'm doing this, behind here, as I hover over any of these elements, it's highlighting that actually in the browser. This window, like I said, sometimes it's docked, but you have the option of document. This is in Firefox. It's going to look slightly different from, but in Firefox we have the different document options here in the top right. So if I use this icon here, it's going to dock it along the bottom, and I can use this icon here to dock it here on the right hand side, and I can use the division between to specify like how much space I want to go at. Very often I'll have it docked towards the bottom because it just is a smarter use of the space. But sometimes I undock it altogether with this icon here. But like I said, here on the left hand side we have our HTML. Here on the right hand side we have the CSS. Now you'll notice this, while we're seeing all of the HTML, even though it's collapsed in certain areas, even when we're seeing all the HTML, we're only seeing a little bit of the CSS. When I select on any one of the elements in the HTML, it's going to show me the CSS, which is only affecting that one thing. So right now, I have the image tag itself selected. This image tag with the ID thumb1. This is showing me the CSS, which is affecting this particular image tag. I don't have an ID for thumb1, but it is showing me that div with the ID thumbs, we're using text align center. That's affecting this particular element. If I click on the div with the ID large, it's showing me the CSS, which is only affecting div with the ID large. So it's showing me the width, it's showing me the margin, the border, text line, all of that from our CSS. So the right hand side is showing us the CSS, but it's only showing us the CSS of whatever I have clicked here on the left hand side. Now, there's a couple of different ways that the inspect element is very useful. One is that as I collapse on these different elements in the HTML, it tells me what is inside of what. So it can be very useful if I have a lot of different divs and there's something which is going wrong. Let's say that I accidentally forget this ending div for thumbs. If I take a look at this in the browser, I'm saying, wait, why is this red border? The red border is supposed to only be around thumbs. This is supposed to be its own thing. Why is that not working correctly? I can go into inspect element, and I can see that thumbs is collapsed, and that large is inside of thumbs. So even though I might not be able to eyeball that in my HTML, in my inspect element, it's telling me, yes, definitely large is inside of thumbs, even though you don't actually want it to be. So that tells me, oh, I must have a missing ending div here. So I would end the thumbs here. So now thumbs and large are kind of on the same tier, the same playing field. But where inspect element is really, really helpful is it helps us to kind of see like how much space something is taking up. So that if we did not see a border on these elements here, and they were just kind of floating here in space, as I'm hovering over this, I can see how much space that particular element, like what I have for thumbs here, is taking up. In the blue, that's representing the content itself. So I can't show this with the mouse, but not hovered over it. But here in the blue, we have the actual content. Here in the purple is what's showing us the margin, or I'm sorry, the purple is showing us the padding, and the yellow is showing us the margin. So where normally, without any sort of background color, background element, or border, this is just kind of floating in space. As I hover over in the HTML, it's telling me how much space that thing is taking up. So that can be kind of a clue as far as if anything is going wrong with our proportions or placement effects. Same thing with the large down here. Now you might notice that I removed the border for these two by affecting the CSS, which is here on the right. Here, where we have the CSS, as I hover over this, the properties here, you see that we have check boxes here. As I click on any of those check boxes, I can add or remove the CSS which I currently set up when I actually typed it out in the HTML. So I can remove that border, I can remove this width and see how that affects things. I can remove this padding and see how that affects things. Same thing with the text align or any of these other ones. I can also change these different values. So I can say, 85% seems kind of excessive for this this thumbnail container. If I want to make this smaller so that it's just around these thumbnails, one thing I could do is I can go into the HTML. I can say, what does 75 look like? And I save that and I hit refresh. Oh, that was on large. So I save it, I hit refresh. That's still too much. Let's go to 55. I save it, and I hit refresh. So I can keep doing that over and over again. Or in the inspect element, where we have, I click on the div with the ID thumbs. Here in the CSS, I get the actual property. If I click on the number itself, where it says 55%, and it highlights that, then I can use the arrow keys on my keyboard to go down just by one, so I can see what this looks like without having to refresh and save, refresh, and save, and refresh. So I can see that if I want to wrap this border exactly around the thumbnails, it needs to be bigger than 28%. So I'm using the arrows on my keyboard. If you hold down Shift, you can go by tens. And if you hold down Alt, you'll go by tenths. So it does point, whatever that is. So, this is probably one of my favorite features of the inspect element, is so that I can see like what this looks like in real time without having to do that save and refresh over and over again. So we can adjust some sort of element that's already there. Like we have the padding here. I could say, what does this look like with more padding? I'm going to click where it has that number so that it highlights that. And then I can say, what does this look like with a bit more padding there? I can also really type out anything we want. So I can say, instead of this border being the red, I'm going to click in this area. And I'm just going to highlight where we have this hexadecimal for the red, and I'm going to put in the hexadecimal for green. And I can just type that out. So I can change the padding, I can change that border, I can change like this margin here. Now, the important thing to remember about the inspect element is this is all fake. None of it's real. This is all just kind of imaginary until you actually write it in your HTML. So this is not some thing that is just magically making this happen in your HTML. As soon as I refresh this, everything goes back to what I typed before. So it's an important thing to remember that even though you might make a lot of different changes here, as far as like changing that width, changing this padding, you're just kind of seeing what this looks like. It's not real until you actually type it out in your HTML. So you want to make sure that you do make those changes in your HTML file or your CSS file before you actually refresh this. Because as soon as you refresh it, it's going to erase all the changes. One last thing with the inspect element. Say that there's a property that you want to add here. So I want to see what this looks like with a background color. Now I don't already have background color here, but if I do a single click anywhere in this area, kind of outside the text, if I click inside the text then I'm editing that value. But if I click outside of that text, just a single click there, the cursor is giving me a place to put in a brand new property. So here I can just type out background dash color, and I can put in type out whatever color I want and just simply hit enter, and then it will show me what it looks like with that property. So yeah, inspect element again is a really cool tool. However, it's one of those things that takes some getting used to. Very often you'll find, like especially as far as editing some of these properties. Sometimes you just like clicking in the wrong place. Like if you click actually on the value itself to the point that like it's actually highlighting just that value, then you're going to be able to actually change that. So it takes some getting used to, but once you get used to it, trust me, it's a very, very helpful tool. Now this is the way that it looks like in Firefox. In Chrome, you see that it looks almost exactly the same. And Safari, you're going to, again, find that it looks almost the same. It's going to function just slightly different here and there, and it might have just slight tweaks, slight differences. So if you're going to get used to using Inspect Element, and you really want to, I would stick with one browser, because going back and forth to different browsers might end up kind of confusing. So whatever your favorite browser is, I would definitely kind of explore the Inspect Element with that browser. Oh, one other thing. Like I said, you can right-click just about anywhere and go into Inspect Element to get into the Inspect Element tool. If you right-click on, like, say that the thing I actually care about is this one thumbnail, then that's the thing I'm actually going to right-click and I hit Inspect Element, and it's going to immediately take me to the HTML for that one thing. So if I close out of this and I hit Inspect Element on this one, it's going to immediately take me to the HTML for that one tag. The Inspect Element is, again, very helpful with that. You'll see that on this one, I'm getting some CSS for large 1, I'm getting some CSS for where it says div #large images. Again, this is telling me all the CSS which is affecting the thing that I've actually selected. So this is saying that yes, it is being affected by where we have image in large 1, where I'm doing the display inline. It's also being affected where we have div #large image, where we have the display none on everything. Now that has a strike through, has a line through in it, meaning that it is being ignored because
It is what?
it's being ignored right now, where it has the strike through right now, because with large 1, I'm being more specific, and I'm saying I want that to be displayed inline. So it's here on the right hand side, it's showing me all the CSS which is affecting this thing that I've affected, or I'm sorry, I have selected, but it will cross certain things out if that kind of thing is being ignored, because something else is being has more specificity. So in this particular example, what I could do is I could click the checkbox where it has display inline. In other words, effectively cutting that out, which means that now it is being affected by this thing that's lower, and it is going to do display none on that. Like I said, Inspect Element is one of those tools that can take a little bit of getting used to, but trust me, I really encourage you to look at it, because it can help debug a lot of issues. It can help to try out certain things in real time as well. But yeah, there's a lot more that I can discuss as far as JavaScript or like the Inspect Element tool, but I think we'll leave it at that for now. There's a lot of things that unfortunately we did not really kind of get to in this class. I truly wish it was like a 6-hour lecture and I could go over more stuff. For example, I don't think we ever really went over the table tag. The table tag is one of those tags where table tag is a tag which used to be used all the time when it comes to actually laying out content. So people would use the table tag as a way of saying like, oh, I'm going to divide my page into these 4 different sections, so I'm going to use a table in that case. But now the table tag is really just used for actual table data. Like, so if you're actually trying to specify things in a table this way, you would use the table tag in that way. So it's not something that is always discussed in like the beginning class, but it's one of those tags, one of those elements that's out there for a very specific kind of data. Same thing for things like lists. So we have like unordered lists and ordered lists. Again, very kind of specific uses for these list tags. And I believe next semester is on the docket for kind of talking about a way of doing navigation with these lists in a different way that we discussed it in this class. But there's lots of different tags out there. There's lots of different CSS properties out there. This class could be 5 times as long. It may not go over all the CSS things that are out there because there's just like a lot. But I believe that this class does give you a really good basis for knowing generally like how tags work, how CSS works, so that even if you're kind of exploring some of these other things, you know, you can kind of see basically, you know, what's actually going on there. But yeah, I highly encourage you to kind of look into some of these other things. I don't think that necessarily you're going to be expected to know anything that wasn't specifically gone over, but again, there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of different tags and properties out there that can be helpful for other specific cases. But that is everything for today. So I have just a little bit, I have some extra time, but I can stay as late as anybody needs to if anyone needs help with their specific websites. Also, you can kind of show David